again, one of the guys who is a refugee from KGO, but actually is such a distinguished historian, and his perspective on so many things related to both the Bay Area and to politics is without comparison. He's just top of the heap. We're happy to have him. John Rothmann, everybody. Yeah.
I love those modest introductions, Mark. Thank you.
Well, it's true, my friend. I've told you, I've exploited you. Now, I assume, I was saying before, and I'll get to Trump in a minute and all that stuff, but I assume on your podcast, which you do every day, you do an 8-minute kind of blast. You've covered the Supreme Court affirmative action decision, or the decision that might affect affirmative action, if you will. I wonder if you could review maybe your thoughts on that for me and for the audience.
The impact is profound. And I can talk about the legal aspects, but you have lawyers who can do that. I'm going to tell you the political aspect. And that is that what is happening is a mobilization, whether it is on the issue of choice, the issue of affirmative action, on a whole host of issues. The Supreme Court is making these rulings, which will mobilize people to go to the polls and vote in 2024. And I'm going to make a prediction, Mark. I'm going to stick my neck way out. But I believe the Democrats are going to sweep in 2024, because what has happened is the Republicans and the Supreme Court have given the Democrats the issues which they will rely on to win. And so I think it's going to be a fascinating moment. My own view on affirmative action, all I can tell you is many of my friends today have jobs because of affirmative action. And you know who the big beneficiary was? The big beneficiary was not people of color. It was white women. So if you're a woman, you should know that in large measure, the accomplishments of women in recent years has come about because of affirmative action being applied to you. So I think there are going to be real ramifications.
Let me go back to the political first, and then we'll double back if we have time. When you say a sweep, you predict a sweep. I wonder if you could speak to exactly what that would look like.
I think that the Democrats will carry the White House. I think they will carry the House and the Senate. And I think that will be critical. And I say that, and please understand, the people of America don't necessarily vote for. They vote against. And the Republicans, in my judgment, are on the wrong side of history when it comes to affirmative action, when it comes to the question of a woman's right to choose, when it comes to, frankly, critical issues. And if Donald Trump is at the head of the ticket, it will have severe ramifications for Republicans' down ticket. So my expectation, and of course, this is a snapshot in time, which is all an analysis really can be. If the election were held today, I believe the Republicans would be in deep trouble. And may I suggest, the barometer was the Wisconsin election for a Supreme Court justice, and I was at a wedding this weekend with people from Wisconsin who said to me, John, it's unbelievable, the reaction of even conservative Republicans who say enough is enough. And may I quickly point out, you opened on the question of global warming. That is, in fact, what my podcast was about today in part. I talked about the rising heat, not only temperature, but also guns, carrying heat, also talking about the scandal, so-called scandal in the White House over cocaine. I mean, I went through a whole series of things, but there is no doubt that the question of climate is going to have to be at the top of our agenda. This is no joke. We are seeing record temperatures, not just in individual places, but around the world. That will affect population, demographics. It will affect coastal areas. It's going to affect food and water. It's going to affect us profoundly. And I think we are at the beginning of a true crisis. And that does not even take into account what's happening now in Europe. And I do want to underline and emphasize the fact that the nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, is now subject, we think, to potential Russian attack. That would set off a catastrophic moment in Europe. And believe me, these are issues which raise the temperature, if you will, as I said this morning, raise the heat on so many different levels.
I just don't think climate is honestly something that people vote on, John. I hate to say it. I do. I'm a tree hugger. So that for me, that's issue one. And honestly, I've never met someone with a strong environmental agenda whose politics in every other way doesn't line up with mine. Okay, so I can't find, a right-wing environmentalist. But I don't see most people. You say that this is the beginning of this kind of. I would suggest it's not the beginning. I know what you're saying. It's the beginning of a clarion call because of the records being set and because of the, literally the planet on fire. But I'd suggest that we're a move along, get along kind of culture. It's like, give me my ESPN and my HBO Max, and and I'm not going to vote. I think that's really the culture that we exist in. We're all.
You're wrong. I hope you're wrong, because if it comes to food and water and people's survival, I think that will be the kicker. And may I tell you, the tragedy, Mark, is as political an issue as it should be. It really is an existential threat to civilization, and there is no solution. So when I say there'll be a penalty, the Republicans have denied the climate change for so long that when that really hits, it won't be that the Democrats can come up with a solution. It will be the question, why didn't the Republicans act when they had the ability to do so? Why was their rhetoric so antithetical to this? So I view this very practically. And I live in San Francisco, where I can tell you the fog rolls in. But if I lived in Southern California, I would be scared out of my wits as the temperatures continue to rise. I had a friend who was in Disneyland last week who said, John, it was almost unbearable.
Tom is saying, certainly it's true that, the heat is really rough. Antithetical is a ding word. Tom is in our chat, is usually the guy who keeps track of the ding words. And he says clarion is a ding word. All right. We did mention, and we posted
well this morning.
Yes,
very impressive. Accuse us of being ding dongs. That's for sure.
Yeah, you are. All right, John, please. We did point out his Around the Political World with John Rothmann. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. He does it regularly. There was a comment I wanted your reaction to in here, and let me see if I can locate it. Essentially, it was suggesting I don't see how they can sweep the Democrats because of the number of open Democratic seats, that there are going to be a bunch of seats open and the GOP is going to capture some of them. Could you speak to that?
A sweep means control of the House and Senate and the White House. If, as I feel today, I can't tell you what I'll feel in a month or a year, but if what I feel today is true, the Republicans are going to take a shellacking. And that, to me, is critical. What is an overwhelming victory? It is having a majority in the House and the Senate and the White House. And that will affect the Supreme Court as well. As all of you know, the Supreme Court is determined by the nominee made by a president. And Donald Trump pledged that he would change the Supreme Court, and he did. But every president attempts to remake the court in their image. And I think that's going to be another critical factor in the election of 2020.
Well, I want to talk about the Supreme Court in a second. Randy says the last 7 days at Disneyland, the average temperature was 81. Maybe he meant Disney World, Randy, okay? Disney World was a lot hotter than that. How dare you take on John Rothmann?
No. May I say, there is a precision in what Randy just said, and that is, my wife was in Disney World last week. And
Disney World
described to me the situation.
That's different than Disneyland.
Yeah, yes. we Californians get confused because to us, Disney is, Orange County.
Yeah, but it's Disney World is what he was talking about, Randy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the correction.
Yes, Randy. Randy's he's Mr. Correction. He's in the lifeguard chair all the time. I want to talk about the Supreme Court because I feel, and this is a kind of jetliner view of things, and I feel that you and I can talk about this. We're a couple of big minds. You know what I'm saying, John? We're a couple of big-brained guys. Let me ask you about the reality. And here is the reality. We really can't get much of anything done in terms of really reforming America because of the political deadlock that is the result of dug-in parties and partisanship that is so intense that you really they'll vote you out of office essentially if you attempt anything that is at all bipartisan. When it comes to landmark legislation to reform anything. And so the course of America is determined now by the courts, which is why the Supreme Court is so scary, because they are reshaping America, as you suggest. And they're going to be there for life, right? Same is true as you look at those judicial appointments on down the way. I don't know what can be done. In a way, I find expanding the court, which I used to be an advocate for, is insufficient. I don't. I really think we have to open up the hood on this country. I don't think we will. But doesn't it trouble you that essentially we've surrendered the legislative aspects of American life to the court, which is conservative overwhelmingly?
Remember, that was the argument the conservative used against the liberals, that the judges were legislating from the bench. Look, we went through this with Franklin Roosevelt in 1937, and there's a book everybody should read. It is by Catledge and Alsop, and it's called 168 Days. It is the story of the struggle of Franklin Roosevelt's court packing. I am opposed to court packing, and I think Joe Biden, who, as you know, is a liberal, made clear this last week that he is opposed to court packing as well. What we have to do is to recognize what I have said for years on the radio and in all my commentaries, and that is who is president matters. And that means that when we elect a president, we're not just electing a president, we're electing a person who will nominate justices, not just for the Supreme Court, but for the appellate courts and for the district courts. And so this is really a struggle that will be waged there. I do not believe there are the votes nor the will to pack the court.
Oh, that's my point. That you're absolutely 100% right on that, and that is also my point. I don't think it's viable, but reforming any kind of court reformation in the same way that it's impossible to impeach the clearly compromised members of the court. It's impossible. I mean,
let me just point out, there's only one justice of the United States Supreme Court who was impeached. His name was Samuel Chase. The year was 1805. Aaron Burr, as president of the Senate, presided at the impeachment trial, and that impeachment failed. The court can discipline itself. And I use the example of Abe Fortas, who was an associate justice of the United States Supreme Court. Lyndon Johnson wanted to promote him to the chief justiceship, but he was compromised. And what was the compromising aspect? He accepted a $20,000 gift from Lewis Wolfson. And as a result, he resigned from the court, not because of conservative pressure alone, but because Earl Warren went to him and said, enough is enough. The court has to discipline itself. Just as Congress makes its own rules, so the court makes its own rules. And the fact that the Chief Justice has declined to step in this matter is, to me, appalling. If Earl Warren could do it, then Chief Justice Roberts should do it as well.
Well, I love that you mentioned the Fortas example, and I love that you mentioned the fact that the SCOTUS machine should handle itself, but it doesn't happen. And the Fortas story is almost quaint. I mean, these guys are so on the take. It is sickening.
And Thomas are a disgrace. And in a normal time, their kind of ethical wrongness, what more can I say? Not a correct word, but the right feeling.
I'll still ding it.
An immediate action by the American people.
Yeah, but again, we are at a loss in terms of, I mean, honestly, John, they could be taking bribes right out in front of the court, which is essentially what they are doing on these vacations and these lavish week-long bacchanal feasts that they have on the yachts of some billionaire. I mean, they're essentially doing, and nothing can be done. When you say we have to take action, we gave you a Democratic president. They wouldn't even have a hearing on his Supreme Court appointment. I mean, it was I feel as though
that's because of the Republicans, and it depends on who you have on the court. If I were in charge, I would want a former justice like Stephen Breyer, for whom I have tremendous respect and integrity. And I hope Stephen will do this if he's listening. And that is to write a proposal that will establish rules for the court. And I would use the Fortis case as an example. But you are absolutely correct, Mark, that this corruption is absolutely wrong and needs to be dealt with. By the way, the Congress cannot impose rules, despite the fact that there are members of the Senate who want to set up an ethical rule for the court. They can't do that. Only the court can set up its own rules. And that means the Chief Justice Roberts must act. And I would employ these former justices who are, frankly, very capable of defining things. What shocks me more than anything else is nobody talks history. Nobody knows the history of the Supreme Court. Nobody understands these ethical questions, and they need to be brought to the forefront.
Bacchanal is a ding word, yes. I want to, before I let you go, John Rothman, ask you about this Trump case. We are going to get the legal story from David Katz in a moment, but I just wanted to, you, I suppose, would put this in the basket of things that you were talking about that would lead to a Democratic sweep, again, as you take this snapshot in time, but with the videos that are damning, actually showing the moving of documents subsequent to the an announcement the FBI was going to be coming, and the clear evidence that Trump showed these classified materials to those without any kind of classified clearance there in Mar-a-Lago on the patio. I'm wondering if you can give me a thought as to how you feel Donald Trump's political fortunes may be affected.
Well, I believe Trump is a criminal, and I believe he needs to be held accountable. And the tragedy is that when Donald Trump Jr., when Donald Trump Jr. stood on the ellipse on January 6th and said the Republican Party is dead, this is now the party of Trump. The Republican Party must reclaim itself. And that is essential to the functioning of the two-party system in America. I believe that Donald Trump is going to be indicted for January 6th. I believe that Donald Trump is going to be indicted for what happened in Georgia. And I believe that the judgment of history must convict him. And let me say it very clearly. When you and I were on KGO, I was known as someone who tried to be fair and objective when it came to Donald Trump. And I sometimes, when I agreed with him, I said so. There is no excuse. And the cult of Donald Trump must be awakened to the fact that this man is as corrupt as can be. And that's my view. I'm going to be interested. I'm going to try to listen to the interview with that you're going to do with David Katz. I hope he comes to the same conclusion. Will the Republican Party come to that conclusion? Will the leaders of the Republican Party, or what passes for a Republican Party, stand up and do what Barry Goldwater and Hugh Scott and John Rhodes did in August of 1974 when they went to the White House and said to Richard Nixon, enough is enough? Fortunately, Donald Trump's out of the White House, but he should not be the leader of the Republican Party, and it's time for the Republican Party to find new leadership and new directions. Even, Mark, if I disagree with the Republican Party on issues, that's legitimate. But Donald Trump is an illegitimate leader in every sense of the word.
Well, here. It seems indisputable. Sadly, I think that those days where, they have private conversations with Abe Fortas to get him to resign, they have private conversations with Nixon, to which you've just referred, that get him to resign. I think those days are over. I don't think any.
Before we're concluding, thank you for letting me come on today. I know I'll be back next Wednesday, but I want to thank you for adjusting your schedule to allow me to be here. And of course, as your little note goes up, my podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothman, is up Monday through Friday. I don't take more than 10 minutes. I try to focus in on issues, and I hope people enjoy it. I'm certainly enjoying it. It's my psychiatric session. It's where I can air my grievances. Of course, the longer session is when I appear on the Mark Thompson program.
Thank you for bringing it back to me, John. You drifted. You started very strong when you were thanking me for moving our schedule, and then somehow you segued into plugging your podcast, and I became concerned, but then you brought it back around to me, and I loved it again.
And I hope people subscribe to the Mark Thompson.
So thank you very much, John. Right. Look, I appreciate it. Thank you, as we say.
Thank you.
All right, John Rothman, everybody. We love him. We love our John Rothman. Right on, John. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.